Arthur is a tyrannical king who rules over the world with an iron fist. During his ascent to the throne, Arthur slaughtered his enemies, nuked cities, and committed countless atrocities, all in the name of power. But one day he reflects on all the things he has done. He's overcome with a sense of guilt, and in the next moment he dies of a heart attack. As he is slowly descending into the abyss, a voice calls out to him and says it will give him a second chance at life, so he had better not mess it up this time. A few moments later, Arthur opens his eyes and finds two people looking down at him. The man says his name is Reynold and he is Arthur's father, while Alice over here is his mother. They don't really expect their newborn baby to understand what they are saying, but they are so excited to have him. Arthur slowly comes to the realization that these people really are his parents and he was just born a minute ago. He's still finding it hard to believe that he's a baby again, but he can't deny that his parents are really good at taking care of him. Overall, he is pretty happy, but he still doesn't like the fact that he is stuck in a baby body. He's got an oversized head, he can't speak, and every couple of hours he shits his diaper involuntarily, so he has lost all control. But then he notices something that's even stranger than his current circumstance. He watches as Reynold channels energy into his fists and proceeds to smash a boulder to pieces. Arthur is amazed because this is a power that he knows nothing about, despite all his years as the ruler of the world. This feat is apparently quite an impressive one, so Reynold is proud of himself and turns to his family, so they can praise him, but he fails to pay attention to his surroundings, so a rock falls straight into his head. Alice was worried something like this might happen, so she then goes over to him and starts using magic to heal Reynold's injury, but she warns him to be more careful next time he wants to show off. Reynold may have just been trying to show off, but when he gets serious, those fists are no joke because he can easily one-shot a wild boar when he goes out hunting, and having him around makes things a lot easier for his party members. By the time the hunting trip is over, Reynold returns to his family and is ready for a welcome back hug, but then he remembers that he is still covered in boar blood, so he's going to have to get cleaned up first. Arthur has learned two things from seeing this. 1. This world is so dangerous that it is common for people to own weapons for their protection. And 2. He's going to have to learn how to fight if he wants to live freely in this world. Now that Reynold is back, Alice says it's time to put Arthur down for a nap, and normally he'd be upset about being treated like a baby, but this is one part he actually enjoys. Back in his previous life, he rarely ever got the chance to sleep peacefully because people would always try to assassinate him when he least expected it. Of course, he could easily defeat any attackers that came after him, but it was incredibly stressful. Months pass and Arthur's baby limbs are finally strong enough to allow him to move around on his own now. The first thing he does with his new mobility is go over to a mirror so he can take a long hard look at himself. His parents think it's cute that Arthur is so mesmerized by his reflection, but he is just coming to terms with the fact that he really is a baby. Anyway, since Arthur can move on his own now, when Alice puts him down for a nap later that day, he sets his plan into motion. As soon as she leaves the room, he opens his eyes and throws his blanket out of the crib so he can climb down and escape his crib. He then proceeds to crawl across the floor while Alice is busy doing the dishes, and she must be really focused on those dishes, because Arthur makes it all the way to the other side of the room without her noticing. Once he gets there, he opens the door to the house's library and pulls out a book because he needs to learn more about this world. After reading one of the books, he learns that this continent is called Dicathen, and it is divided into 3 kingdoms. The Dwarf Kingdom, a nation of dwarves that live in vast cave cities. The Elenoir Kingdom, a nation of elves who live deep within the forest. And the Elven Kingdom, a kingdom of humans ruled by a king, although here no one ever nuked the cities to take over. Arthur still wants to learn more, so he pulls out another book and it gives him some much-needed answers. Arthur had noticed that the level of technology in this world is lacking, and the reason for that is the presence of magic. People are able to use magic by manipulating the mana within their bodies, and while it's not exactly common, magic is a huge part of life in this world. People can use magic in 2 ways, namely augmentation and conjuring. Augmentation involves circulating mana within your body, granting the user incredible strength, defense, and agility, while conjurers can project their mana outwards and use it to control any phenomenon they desire. That pretty much sums up the info about this world's magic system, but Arthur doesn't find anything about the healing magic Alice used earlier, so he assumes she must be an exception of some sort. From what Arthur can tell, most people manifest their mana when they hit puberty, and by channeling that mana through something called a mana core, one can learn to control it and become a mage. This is easy for Arthur to understand, because in his previous life he rose to power thanks to the innate power of ki within him. It functioned the exact same way as mana, so he tries focusing all his energy to see if he can generate a reaction, and sure enough his mana core begins to develop. This is a huge step forward in Arthur's development. Before he can do any more training, Alice finally finds him. She's been worried sick ever since she found out he wasn't in his crib, so she's glad he wasn't hurt. But while she's holding him up, she notices that something is different about him. Arthur is worried she might have sensed the mama within him, but she actually just noticed that Arthur pooped himself again. 2 years go by and Alice is writing in her journal one day. She's so grateful that Arthur is growing up strong and healthy, but she's starting to grow a little concerned because she hasn't seen Arthur smile even once since he was born. Just then, she notices Reynold and Arthur outside, and it looks like Reynold is giving Arthur some sword lessons. Arthur seems pretty interested, but Alice is furious that Reynold would let a 2-year-old swing a dangerous stick around. By now, Arthur has realized that Alice isn't someone you want to get angry, so he's going to have to be careful not to make her mad. To avoid any other dangerous activities, Alice decides to take Arthur out for the day to show him around the town, and Arthur is particularly excited about this because it will give him a chance to gather valuable first-hand information about this world. He can discern the level of this nation's technology by looking at the weapons that are sold to the general public, and he also gets to see various substances that he has never encountered before. Best of all, he got to witness a mage casting fire magic up close. So overall, today's trip proved to be incredibly valuable for him. By the end of the day, Arthur's baby body is exhausted from all the activity, so he is struggling to stay awake and Alice wants to put him down for a nap as soon as they get home. As limiting as this new life has been, Arthur has come to enjoy life with loving parents. In his past life, Arthur got dropped off at spawn with no starter kit, so he was forced to live his entire childhood in an orphanage and never got to experience parental love, so this is a nice change of pace for him. Arthur soon falls asleep on Alice's shoulder, so she starts carrying him to his crib, and along the way she tells him how proud she is of him for learning so much. She has noticed all the times he sneaks out of his bed to read books, and she saw how excited he was to see the outside world, so she is sure he has an adventurous spirit. She assumes he must have gotten that from Reynold, and sooner or later, Arthur is bound to want to leave home to see the world on his own. Personally, she would prefer it if Arthur lived a peaceful life here, but as long as he is happy, she will support him no matter what. The next day, Arthur is standing by the window and watches as Reynold begins practicing in the front yard. He is interested in seeing the applications of magic up close and personal again, so he eagerly watches as Reynold begins circulating mana within his body. Eventually, rocks begin to fly up from the ground, and Reynold makes it seem like it's the greatest thing in the world. But in reality, it is pretty pitiful. This is the limit of Reynold's skill when it comes to conjuring, but that's because Reynold's specialty is augmentation, so his magic is much more efficient when he sticks to using it within his body. Seeing his father's power motivates Arthur to go do some training, but just when he's about to climb down from the table, Alice tells him it's time for his nap. Arthur still can't speak yet, so he starts whining as they pass the bookshelf, but Alice tells him he needs to take a nap, so there's no time for books right now. Normally there would be nothing Arthur could do about this, but he recently learned a legendary technique, pouting. Arthur has mastered the art of weaponizing his cuteness as a baby, so even though Alice still wants to put him down for a nap, she eventually relents and just lets him read his book. Once Arthur is alone, he begins practicing with his mana core, and over the past 2 years he has managed to get pretty good at it. By gathering various fragments of mana within his body, he was able to generate a mana core within himself, and although it was incredibly strenuous, it was well worth it. Now, with just a little more effort, he should be able to cast his first spell, but Arthur drastically underestimates the strength of his mana and accidentally blows up the house. Alice and Reynold were outside when the explosion happened, and it was so huge that Reynolds' back gets burned up really bad, but he and Alice are otherwise alright. However, they soon realize that Arthur was still in the house when it blew up, so they rush inside to check if he's still alive. There's no way a baby could have survived an explosion of that magnitude, but when Reynold reaches the library, he is shocked to find that not only is Arthur completely unharmed, he was also the source of the explosion. He's barely 3 years old, so it shouldn't have been possible for him to use magic until he was at least 12. Yet Arthur is already practically a master of mana. He stands proudly and looks at his parents, but he forgets that the house is falling apart. So when 2 roof beams fall straight towards him, he is completely caught off guard. He tries running away, but his stubby baby legs fail him, so it looks like he's done for. Fortunately, both Alice and Reynold rush in to save him, and while Alice shields him with her body, Reynold uses his magic to block all the debris and save them both. Arthur is a bit shocked since this is the first time anyone has ever risked their life to save him, but Alice is so relieved that he is alright that she starts crying. Arthur still isn't used to having people care about him like this, so seeing her cry makes him cry as well. Things continue. Arthur never could have done something like this in his old life because he was expected to be a ruthless king. At one point, a man tried to assassinate Arthur, so after he was caught, the entire council assembled and prepared to sentence him for his crimes. And on top of that, they plan to ship the man's wife and son off to a camp that has never heard of the Geneva Convention, so they are doomed to be tortured and experimented on. Because why not? The man begins to beg Arthur to spare his family because they don't deserve to suffer for what he did. And as an act of mercy, Arthur decided to kill him on the spot. That was basically an average Monday for him back then, but now he spends his Mondays training with his father. Reynold wants Arthur to try practicing with gauntlets, but Arthur already has a lifetime of sword experience, so he's not switching his main weapon. Since Arthur is so insistent on using his sword, Reynold decides to use one as well, and to make things a little more interesting, he's going to reinforce his sword with mana. However, to his utter shock, Arthur does the exact same thing and cuts through Reynold's sword with ease. After seeing this, Reynold realized that Arthur is way too talented for him to train, so he is thinking of getting a professional teacher for him and goes inside to talk to Alice about it. Alice flat out says no to the idea because she can't stand the thought of sending Arthur to some random town just so he can learn. They had already talked about this, and Reynold was supposed to teach Arthur to fight while she would teach him about magic. But Reynold points out that Arthur managed to cut right through his sword during practice, even though it was infused with mana and the kid is still a toddler for God's sake. If he's doing stuff like this at such a young age, then who knows what he could be capable of in the future, so Reynold thinks it's important for him to have a proper teacher. Alice can't deny that Arthur is unnaturally talented, but she still hates the idea of leaving him alone at a school in the city. So she and Reynold start arguing over it for a few minutes because they can't come to an agreement. Arthur is getting sick of all the arguing, so he points out that they can just come with him to the city. That way he can still get a teacher, and his parents won't have to leave him alone. The two of them hadn't realized that was an option, but it solves all their problems, so they think it's a great idea. So they immediately start making preparations for the journey, and the next day a carriage arrives to take them to the city. They will be traveling with some of their old friends, and Arthur recognizes them because they are the ones who helped Alice and Reynold rebuild the house after he blew it up. They are all in a party called Twin Horns, and the leader, Adam, introduces himself to Arthur. Angela introduces herself as well, while simultaneously introducing Arthur to her chest and nearly choking him out, and Alice is happily watching it happen. Luckily, before Arthur passes out, Durden gets him away from Angela and introduces himself as well, but he is a bit more gentle and just gives Arthur a high five. Arthur then notices a girl standing on top of the carriage, and you know she's trying to her farm because there's no reason to be standing on the carriage right now. She doesn't say anything, so the others tell Arthur that her name is Jasmine and the final member of the team is Helen, the archer. Since the introductions are finally done, the group needs to get moving, so they all climb into the carts and head out. Along the way, Alice asks Arthur if he is excited about his first big trip, and Arthur says yes, but internally he is thinking about how primitive this world is. They still use horse-drawn carriages to travel here, while in Arthur's old world he had an entire fleet of flying cars he could use at any time. After traveling for most of the day, the group decides to take a break for lunch, so they set up camp, but as soon as they stop, they are attacked by wolves. Although these wolves are pretty dumb because they didn't even try to surround the group, they just charged straight in and got bodies by the team of adventurers in an instant. Arthur finds the whole display interesting since this is the first time he has seen real combat in this world, and he intends to become strong enough to handle threats like that on his own soon. Since they got a lot of dead wolf meat now, the group decides to cook it for dinner tonight, but they got no spices, so it's just gonna be plain grilled meat. Just then, Alice notices that Reynolds' arm is slightly injured, so she offers to heal it for him. But before she does, Jasmine tells her to wait a moment. All the others gather around Alice to keep a lookout because healers like her are incredibly rare in this world. So if someone were to see her using healing magic, then she could end up being targeted for it. Once Alice is done healing Reynold, everyone goes back to what they were doing before, but Adam decides he wants to get a little exercise before he goes to bed. And there's no better way to do that than by fighting a 4-year-old. Seems like a jerk move, but Adam has heard about how strong Arthur is and he just wants to see for himself, so this is just a practice match. Adam tells Arthur to get ready and he has already imbued his spear with mana, so Arthur does the same. As the match begins, Arthur channels some magic into his feet, so just as he is about to clash with Adam, he vanishes and reappears behind him. This would have been the perfect chance for Arthur to strike, but his stubby toddler feet slip on the ground, so he loses his footing and Adam gets a chance to recover. Arthur and Adam then begin clashing, but I'm pretty sure the animation budget must have had negative values. Anyway, Arthur gets knocked back since his toddler body is too light to keep up with the seasoned adventurer, so he gets knocked into the air. Luckily, the others save him before he hits the ground, and they all start yelling at Adam for nearly hurting Arthur, but Adam says he couldn't help it because Arthur was too strong for him to hold back. There's no way a toddler should be capable of such strength, so he thinks Randall must have been giving him some kind of super soldier training. But in reality, he never actually taught Arthur to do any of this stuff, he just learned it on his own. Just then, Jasmine walks up to Arthur and startles him by accident. She was really impressed by Arthur's fight, so she asks him to teach her how to do that thing with the magic in his feet. Arthur was hoping to keep his technique secret since it is something he mastered in his past life. But she's not taking no for an answer, and from the look in her eyes, she's going to pester him relentlessly until he caves, so he may have to teach her eventually. The next morning, the journey continues as planned, and along the way they take a few breaks to relax. During these breaks, Adam gives Arthur a few basic spearman lessons, and Helen teaches him how to use a bow a few minutes after that. And with a few basic lessons, he is able to figure it out pretty quickly. The only weapon knowledge Arthur has from his past life is with a sword, so these lessons are really valuable to him. And since he is learning so much from them, he decides to teach Jasmine his technique after all. By channeling magic into your feet and using wind magic at the same time, you are able to boost your speed tremendously. And after demonstrating it once, Jasmine is able to replicate it perfectly. Later on, Arthur is reading a magic book in the carriage, but for some reason, Jasmine is sitting there too and just staring at him. And it's not a coincidence either because she keeps taking every chance she can get to get close to Arthur. The next morning, Jasmine gives Arthur a knife as thanks for teaching her that technique, and it's clear that she really likes Arthur since she usually doesn't interact with people intentionally. A few minutes later, everyone gets back into the carriages and they continue through the journey. But as Arthur is reading his book, the carriage is suddenly attacked by bandits. They are being attacked by bandits, and the carriage is completely surrounded, so there's nowhere for them to go. The bandit leader orders his men to capture the women and children so they can be sold as slaves. So all the bandits rush in and the adventurers do their best to hold them off. In terms of raw power, the Twin Horns and Reynold are much stronger than the individual bandits, but there are way too many for them to defeat on their own, so sooner or later they're going to get overwhelmed. At one point, Reynold gets launched into the carriage by the bandit leader and he is badly hurt, so Alice wants to come to heal him. However, Reynold tells her to stay away because the bandits find out about her power and they'll start targeting her. So instead, he asks Arthur to take Alice and run as far away as he can. Arthur doesn't want to leave Reynold behind, but Reynold tells him that Alice is pregnant with another child, so protecting her should be a top priority. Arthur understands when Reynold gives the signal, he prepares his magic to flee with Alice, and in the meantime, Reynold says he will hold the bandits off. The bandit leader orders his men to go after Arthur and Alice, but Reynold refuses to let that happen, so he charges in and clashes with him. The bandit leader managed to knock Reynold down before, but this time Reynold's family is on the line, so he's not going down easily. While Reynold is keeping the bandit leader busy, a few of the more insignificant bandits try to go after Arthur and Alice instead, but Adam and Jasmine throw some daggers at them and take them out to clear a path for Arthur to escape with Alice. They're all doing their best to keep the bandits away from Arthur, and he is doing his best to get Alice to safety. It's honestly ironic how he spent his previous life taking things with no regard for others, and now he is forced to run away in order to avoid losing someone precious to him. After running away for several minutes, Arthur thinks they should be far enough from the bandits to be safe now, but he was wrong. One bandit is watching them from atop a cliff, and this one is capable of using magic, so he attacks Arthur and Alice with a wind spell. Arthur doesn't notice him at first, and by the time he does, the spell has already been cast, so the only thing Arthur can do is push Alice out of the way and take the hit alone. The wind blast knocks Arthur back, so he's going to fall off the cliff, and with his toddler body, that's basically a death sentence. However, if he's going to die, he's not going out alone, so as he's falling off the cliff, he takes the knife he got from Jasmine and throws it at the magic bandit. The knife hits the bandit and the string wraps around his ankle, so Arthur is able to use it to pull the guy down with him. The adventurers try to use their magic to save Arthur, but he has already fallen too far for them to reach him, so Arthur is doomed. As he falls to his inevitable death, Arthur looks back on his life, and even though he is going to die, he is filled with a strange sense of peace because he knows he managed to protect his precious family. He finally understands why that man in his past life was so desperate to protect his family. Arthur didn't even think twice about sacrificing himself to save Alice. And while he doesn't regret his actions at all, he still wishes he could have survived to live with them a little longer. The story continues. We see after that deadly fall, Arthur somehow manages to get out of the river and make his way into a cave. However, he comes face to face with a terrifying monster, and he's starting to regret coming here for shelter. He tries to sneak attack the monster to increase his chances of survival, but the monster simply smacks him out of the air and tells him to calm down. It tells Arthur that it isn't evil and just wants to be friends, but the last time a stranger said that to me, I ended up in the back of a van, so I'm not sure Arthur should trust it. In any case, he is still badly wounded and his injuries aren't going to recover unless he eats something. So the monster starts picking fruits off the cave wall. It tells Arthur to eat the fruits, but he doesn't trust the random wall fruits, so he's about to get up to talk his way out of this. But just then, his injuries finally catch up to him, so as he tries to get up, he hears something snap and starts crying his eyes out. The monster tells him to stop crying because it's a miracle that he survived that fall in the first place. Arthur has a lot of things he wants to ask, but the monster tells him that it won't answer his questions unless he eats the fruits. He was hesitant at first, but after biting into the first berry, Arthur realizes that they actually taste pretty good. Once he is done stuffing his face, Arthur turns to the monster and asks it if it knows anything about his parents' current condition. The monster explains that it isn't able to leave this cave, so it can't check up on Arthur's family for him. But it does have an ability that allows it to see over a great distance, so it generates a screen and shows Arthur that his parents successfully defeated the rest of the bandits. That means they are still alive and well, and Arthur couldn't be happier to hear such good news. He thanks the monster for letting him know that his parents are still alright, and since Arthur is going to be stuck here for a while, he decides to be friendly with it. The monster's name is Sylvia, and she turns out to be a really nice person. Over the next few days, Arthur stayed here, ate, and rested so his injuries could heal, and all the while, Sylvia kept watch over him. Once his body had recovered, Arthur wanted to return home as soon as possible. But according to Sylvia, Arthur would never survive the journey home by himself. His cave is currently on the outskirts of the Elven Forest, and this part of the forest is filled with all sorts of magical beasts and immoral bandits, and Arthur simply can't handle all that. But that doesn't mean he's going to be stuck here forever. Sylvia has the ability to open a dimensional rift so she can send Arthur back home, or at least to a safer location than this forest. But it's going to take a long time for her to create the rift, so Arthur is going to have to wait until then. Since he has nothing better to do, Arthur picks up a stick and starts swinging it around to practice his swordsmanship skills. Several more days go by, and while Arthur has grown to enjoy Sylvia's company, he hasn't managed to learn anything about her. All he knows is she looks like a terrifying monster. She's apparently hiding from something, and she's a very kind person. After Arthur is done with his sword training for the day, he heads over to a rock and sits down so he can start training his mana. Sylvia is impressed that a child as young as Arthur already has a mana core, but she's sure that he never learned how to do this. She stretches out her hand and a large quantity of mana begins pooling in her hand. Arthur is amazed because Sylvia is basically accumulating mana while she's casting her spell, and if Arthur were able to learn such a thing then he would undoubtedly become incredibly strong. With that said, before Sylvia even offers to teach it to him, she asks Arthur what he plans to do with the power he will gain from learning this technique. Arthur had never really considered it before, but now that he thinks about it, he recalls how his family and friends were all nearly wiped out because of some bandits. So he tells Sylvia that he will use his power to destroy anyone who dares to hurt his family. However, Sylvia doesn't like that answer, so she flicks Arthur on the forehead and knocks him back. She says she would never teach her technique to someone who thinks like that, but Arthur doesn't understand why she is so upset since it is perfectly natural to want to kill your enemies. Sylvia wants to prove a point, so she raises her finger to Arthur's head, and tells him that she could easily split his skull open with it, or she could touch him gently. She asks Arthur which one he would prefer, and Arthur obviously doesn't want to die, so he says he would prefer the gentle touch. It's easy to let your actions be driven by anger and hatred, but once you give in, your life will become an empty, endless cycle hate. She doesn't want Arthur to waste his life like that, so she asks him once more, "What will you do with the power?" Arthur thinks about it again, but this time he focuses on the bright smiles of the people close to him. So he answers that he wants to use his power to protect the people he cares about, and Sylvia likes that answer much more. Meanwhile, outside the cave, a monster that looks very similar to Sylvia seems to be tracking her down, and it is really close to finding her. Back in Arthur's old world, he was the king, but that didn't mean he held all the power. The people who were really in charge were the senators, so Arthur was basically just an agent of war to be called upon whenever the senators needed him to commit unspeakable acts of violence. But he never liked living that way. Back to the present, Sylvia is teaching Arthur how to use her technique, and after showing him how it's done, she asks him to try it for himself. Arthur begins condensing the mana in the surrounding air, and once he gets the hang of it, is able to use that mana to power himself up. He can already feel the difference in his strength, so he runs over to Sylvia to thank her for teaching him. However, Sylvia suddenly senses someone approaching, so she knocks Arthur into a pile of rocks and tells him to stay quiet. Arthur has no idea what's going on, so he takes a look out of the pile of rocks and sees another monster that looks just like Sylvia. Sylvia seems to know who he is, and she is surprised that he managed to find her here, but the second monster doesn't want to waste time, so he demands that Sylvia come with him. However, Sylvia says nah, so he immediately starts blasting. Arthur wants to go help Sylvia, but he hears her voice in his head, telling him not to worry about her. The other monster tries to convince Sylvia to just cooperate with him because otherwise he will have to kill her. But Sylvia would rather die than listen to him, so she starts charging up her mana and reveals her true form. It turns out that Sylvia is a dragon, and in this form she's able to use much more power than before. She fires a huge blast at the other monster, so he blocks it, but he tells her she's being foolish because with the current state of her body, she won't be able to survive using that much power. Sylvia is well aware that she will probably die from this, but she doesn't mind because she has lived a long and happy life. She manages to push the other monster into a wall, but he isn't out of the fight yet, so he hits back up and starts raining several blasts on Sylvia. She takes a lot of damage from those blasts, but right now she is more worried about Arthur than herself because this fight is getting dangerously close to the place she hit him. The other monster launches one more blast at her and she can't dodge it since it would hit Arthur, so she uses the full extent of her power to intercept the blast and stop time temporarily. While time is stopped, she tells Arthur to come out of his hiding place. Arthur does, as she says, since it seems safe and he would like to ask questions about everything that's going on, especially the fact that she's a dragon, but there's no time for that. Her time-stop power won't last much longer, so she needs to get Arthur out of here as soon as possible. She opens the dimensional rift she had been preparing, but due to her injuries and the fact that she didn't have time to properly finish the spell, the portal is connected to the middle of nowhere instead of Arthur's home. She was trying to avoid sending him into the forest since it would be dangerous, but she has no choice now. In any case, she is confident that Arthur can survive on his own and make his way back home with the technique she taught him, so she's not worried about his safety anymore. She once again asks him what he intends to use his power for, and without hesitation, Arthur answers, saying he will only use it to protect his family. So Sylvia is satisfied that he won't use his power for selfish reasons. Before he leaves, there are a few things she wants to give him, so she forms an egg and a feather in front of Arthur. She asks him to wrap the egg in the feather and cherish it well, and as a final parting gift, she imprints her will onto Arthur's body in the form of a mark on his arms. Arthur is confused by the fact that he suddenly got 2 full sleeve tattoos, but Sylvia doesn't have the strength to explain it. She tells him he will figure out how to use it one day, but sadly she won't be there to teach him anymore. She also apologizes to Arthur because the truth is that she could have teleported him back to his family when he first got here, but she was just having so much fun with him around that she didn't want it to end. And now she ended up putting him in danger because of her selfish decision. Arthur feels terrible because he knows he doesn't have the power to save Sylvia from dying here, even though she taught him so much. He doesn't care if she's a dragon or a monster. To him, she's a precious member of his family. He tells her he thinks of her as a mother, but Sylvia reminds him that he already has a mom, so Arthur says she can be his grandma then. Sylvia wasn't expecting him to say that, but she really likes the sound of being called grandma, so she asks Arthur to say it one more time, and he happily does so. Sylvia is really sad that she won't get to see Arthur again, but they are running out of time, so she nudges him forward so he can go through the portal. Arthur understands, so he takes the gifts she gave him and walks through, but at the last second he changes his mind and starts baiting Sylvie to come with him. But she can't do that, so she closes the portal and sends Arthur away. Time then resumes and Sylvia is hit with the blast from the other monster and the damage looks fatal. She collapses to the ground, but the monster isn't convinced that she is dead because it knows she is too powerful to be taken out by a blast like that. However, he lets his guard down while he is approaching her motionless body, and as soon as he is within range, Sylvia uses all of her remaining energy to fire a blast that incinerates him along with everything in a 1-mile radius. As Arthur is being teleported, he hears one final message from Sylvia. She asks him if he remembers what she said earlier about the right way to use your power, and Arthur remembers, but he is still really sad about what happened. Sylvia tells him that the world is a sad place, so things like this will happen from time to time, but that's why Arthur needs to change it for the better. Arthur protests and tells her that there's no way he could do something like that, but she doesn't expect him to change the world immediately. He can do it one step at a time after all. This isn't his first time taking control of the world. Sylvia is aware of Arthur's past life as a king, and while she doesn't agree with how he ruled back then, she is sure that as long as Arthur doesn't let himself be consumed by hatred, he will become a great king who makes the world a better place. A little while later, Arthur wakes up on the floor and he swears that he will fulfill Sylvia's request. But before that, he needs to find his way out of this forest. The story continues. We see after being teleported into the Elven Forest, Arthur begins his journey to return home. But while he is walking, he suddenly hears a blood-curdling scream from across the woods. It sounds like it's coming from a little girl, so he immediately gathers mana in his feet and begins racing to check it out. He jumps up into a tall tree for a good vantage point, and once he is up there, he can clearly see a group of bandits kidnapping a little girl. She tried getting away from them, but the bandits have already grabbed her and are covering her mouth to stop her from screaming anymore. Since the girl is an elf, they plan to sell her as a slave on the black market for a huge profit as soon as they leave the forest, so they tie her up and stuff the girl in the back of their carriage. As Arthur watches the whole thing unfold, he has flashbacks to the moment he and his family were attacked by bandits as well. He recalls hearing the bandits mention something about keeping him and the women in the group alive so they could be sold as slaves later, and it really pisses him off. The first thought that comes to mind is that he should slaughter all the bandits for committing such a heinous crime, but he remembers what Sylvia told him about controlling his rage, so he takes a moment to think and calm down. He realizes that if he attacked right now, it would put the girl's life in danger, so he decides to be patient and wait for the right chance to strike. All the bandits get in their carriage to start riding out of the forest, and Arthur follows them closely from the shadows. By nightfall, the bandits are forced to take a break and set up camp since they can't travel in the dark, and Arthur is contemplating whether he should continue following them until they get to a human town or attack them now. But then he overhears the bandit talking about how his favorite race is elves, so Arthur realizes he can't risk leaving them alone with the girl any longer. However, he still needs to wait for it to get dark before he makes his move, so Arthur sits down and starts meditating to prepare himself for all the murder charges he's about to catch. Once it is sufficiently dark, Arthur opens his eyes and begins planning his attack. He notices that the bandits have a group of horned wolves on a leash, and he finds it odd that the wolves are obeying a group of humans with no resistance. He takes a closer look at them and realizes that they are wearing magic collars to force them to be obedient, and he can use this to his advantage, so he throws a couple of rocks at the wolves to rile them up. The bandits hear their wolves howling over there, and the leader orders one of his men to hurry up and go shut those damn wolves up. The bandit immediately gets up and kicks one of the wolves in the neck to get it to stop barking, and the second the bandit is distracted, Arthur seizes the opportunity. He summons him on a blade before jumping down behind the bandit, and within a few seconds the bandit has been slashed to death. Arthur then takes the bandit's weapon, and as another one comes to check what all the commotion is, Arthur jumps on his back and slits his throat. That's 2 bandits down already, but Arthur's body is already getting exhausted, so he needs to end this quickly. Just then, another bandit comes to check why the other 2 are taking so long, so Arthur tries to insta-kill this one as well, but unfortunately he missed the vital organs, so the guy screams and alerts the other bandits of Arthur's presence. The bandit leader realizes that Arthur is a mage, so he knows this isn't going to be an easy fight, but he also doesn't want to kill Arthur because selling a mage kid on the black market would earn him even more money than the elf girl. The bandit leader begins channeling magic into his arms and swings at Arthur, so Arthur jumps back and tries to counter with a kick, but the bandit leader managed to dodge. Arthur tries to catch him off guard by throwing his knife at him, but the bandit catches it and uses it against him. As a result, Arthur is knocked to the ground and the bandit lifts him up by the ankles to taunt him. He tells Arthur he is no match for an adult when it comes to strength, and Arthur realizes that the bandit is right, so he decides to attack with his magic instead. He casts a fireball right on top of the bandit's knee, and while he is screaming out in pain, Arthur stabs him in the head with his knife. Now all that's left is to finish off the bandit that Arthur injured earlier, and once he is dead, Arthur goes to check on the girl in the carriage. The girl was blindfolded the entire time and she has no idea what's going on, so Arthur tells her he has taken care of all of the bandits, so she is safe now. Her name is Tesha, and as Arthur leads her out of the carriage, he tells her she can go home, but Tesha suddenly notices some blood on Arthur's hand and she gets really worried about him. Arthur realizes that it's normal for children to be horrified at the sight of blood, so it might not be a good idea to let her see all the dead bodies on the floor. He asks Tesha to wait over here for a minute and goes to cover up all the bandit bodies with a tarp. She asks Arthur what happened to the people that kidnapped her, and Arthur doesn't want to admit that he killed them, so he just says they got into a bit of an accident, so they won't be bothering her anymore. The girl doesn't seem to have any more questions, so Arthur gets her stuff out of the bandit carriage for her and says goodbye because he needs to continue heading home. However, Tesha grabs his arm and begs him to stay because she doesn't want to be left alone. If Arthur leaves her here by herself, she might get eaten by tree ghosts or something. He asks her if she knows how to get home, and she does know the directions, but she has no idea how long it will take to get to her village. Arthur doesn't like the idea of taking detour, but he also knows there's no chance that Tesha will make it home alive if he doesn't help, so he ends up agreeing to escort her back home. Arthur looks over at the wolves that the bandits captured, and he briefly considers using them for transportation, but he has no idea how to maintain control over a wolf, so he wants to just leave them behind. However, Tesha says they should at least remove the magic collars on the wolves so they can return to the forest. Arthur warns her that the wolves might attack once she removes the collars, but she thinks she'll be fine since she hasn't done anything to anger them, and as a resident of this forest, it is her job to take care of the creatures that live here. She eventually takes the collars off the wolves, and sure enough the wolves peacefully walk back into the forest. The next morning, Arthur and Tesha begin walking in the direction of the elf village, and after a while they take a break to eat. Arthur cooks up a little stew and tells her she has to eat it because she'll need the energy for the long journey ahead. Tesha thinks the stew smells weird, but Arthur isn't exactly a world-class chef. It's literally made out of nothing but dried meat and salt, so it doesn't taste good, but it's better than nothing. Tesha asks Arthur why he came to the Elfshire Forest in the first place, since it's rare for humans to come here, much less a lone child, so Arthur explains how he got separated from his family and ended up here. While they are on the topic, Arthur asks Tesha what it's like to live in the Kingdom of Elenoir, and she absolutely loves it here. All of her parents are often busy with work, so she spends most of her time with her servant and her grandfather. They continue their journey, but since Tesha doesn't know how far away her village is, it's hard to gauge how long this journey will take. And to make matters worse, those wolves that Tesha released have been following them for a while now, so Arthur is really wishing he had just killed them from the start. That night, Arthur decides to stand guard outside the tent to make sure the wolves don't attack him and Tesha while they are sleeping, but after a while, Tesha pokes her head out and asks Arthur to come to bed. Arthur tells her that he's not sleepy, so he's going to stand guard out here, but she's way too scared to be alone, so she pleases him to come inside the tent with her. Arthur eventually gives in, so he decides to just keep watch from inside the tent for Tesha's sake. She's trying to pretend that she's not scared, but she also demands that Arthur stay by her side at all times. Before she goes to bed, she wants to learn a little about the human kingdom, so she asks Arthur if it's true that all humans are perverts who marry multiple wives. Arthur is surprised to hear Tesha say that and asks where she heard it from, so she explains that her grandfather told her. Arthur can't deny that people like that exist, especially in the Glader family, but for the most part, humans are modest people. Tesha believes Arthur, so she turns over and falls asleep immediately. The wolves didn't attack, so by morning Arthur and Tesha got up and continued their journey. Tesha has really been warming up to Arthur over the past few days, and now that she has had a chance to forget about the slave traders, she seems a lot happier. Although she is still pretty hopeless when it comes to survival skills because she can't even cross a creek on her own, so Arthur has to carry her across. All of a sudden Arthur is hit with a strange, throbbing pain in his chest and he has no idea what's wrong with him. Tesha worriedly runs off to go find some medicinal herbs that might help, but Arthur doesn't think this is a regular illness. While he's propped up against a tree, the wolf from before shows up, and Arthur is starting to panic because he's in no condition to fight it off if it decides to attack right now. Tesha soon returns with the curves, so Arthur warns her to stay away because the wolf might be dangerous. But to his surprise, the wolf just drops a dead pig in front of Arthur and walks away. Arthur is confused by what just happened, but Tesha assumes the wolf was trying to thank him for his help earlier. That night, Arthur and Tesha set up camp and enjoy some roasted meat by the fireside. This tastes a lot better than the stew, so Tesha really enjoys it. And while she was searching for medicinal herbs earlier, she happened to find some mushrooms, so she offers some to Arthur. But he probably shouldn't have accepted the strange mushrooms because it gave him a bad case of diarrhea. After Arthur is done emptying his guts, he is really tired, so he is seconds away from passing out, but Tesha keeps talking to him. She is telling Arthur about how her grandpa used to read her storybooks about the human and dwarven kingdoms, so she always wanted to visit those places, but she was never allowed to since elves don't trust people from the other races. Just then, Tesha realizes that Arthur hasn't been listening to a single word she said, but she knows he's just sleepy, so she covers him with a blanket and wishes him a good night. The next morning the two continue their journey, but the pain in Arthur's chest is getting worse. Tesha apologizes for not being able to help, but Arthur tells her it's not a big deal. Changing topics, Tesha asks Arthur if it's alright for her to call in Art since she thinks of him as a friend. After all, they spent so much time together and the two of them have gotten really close. Arthur says he doesn't mind being friends with her, and Tesha is surprised that he didn't react much. Arthur then jokingly swears to cherish every moment that the great Lady Tesha thinks of him as a friend, but that makes her upset, so she tells Arthur to stop acting so childish. Arthur thinks it's funny that she would say that when she was the one begging him to stay by her side at all times because she was scared, but Tesha says that's an entirely different thing. Jokes aside, now that Arthur thinks about it, Tesha is the first friend he has ever made. Even in his old world, people were so scared of him that he never truly had anyone whom he could call a friend till now. Just then, Tesha spots something that looks familiar, so she tells Arthur to come take a look. Arthur comes over expecting to see a cool-looking stick or something, but to his surprise, he is standing in front of a huge tree with a portal in the middle of it. Tesha tells Arthur that this is the entrance to Elf Village, so she extends her hand and tells him to come with her. The story continues. We see the elves still really hate humans, so the second Arthur sets foot in the Elf Village, he is apprehended and held at blade point. He looks to Tesha for help since she could vouch for him, but to his shock, Tesha just coldly stares at him and doesn't say a word. Upon seeing this, Arthur thinks Tesha must have set him up to be killed, and he can't believe he was foolish enough to believe anyone would actually want to be friends with him. After all, he has already suffered countless betrayals in his past life before. The elves are about to cut off his head while Tesha watches, but it turns out she had nothing to do with it. No idea why she didn't say anything until now, but once she hears the guards say they are going to kill Arthur, she tells them to stop. One of the guards warns her that this boy is a dangerous human, but Tesha asserts that Arthur isn't dangerous at all. In fact, he's the only reason she was able to make it back home. Tesha's testimony should have at least made the guard reconsider executing Arthur. But no, he just assumes Arthur must have brainwashed her into thinking he's a good person, so the guard still plans to kill him anyway. However, before he could do that, a man appears before them and demands that they let the boy go. His name is Virion, and he is Tesha's grandfather as well as the former king of the elf tribe, but he is much more reasonable, so he believes Tesha when she says Arthur saved her. He also apologizes to Arthur for treating him this way when he went through all this trouble to save Tesha, but it was pretty suspicious that the missing princess happened to show up with a random human boy. Arthur is relieved that he isn't going to be killed anymore, but he's also shocked to hear that Tesha is a princess since she never told him. They literally traveled together for days, but Tesha just didn't think it was important enough to mention apparently. Just then, Tesha's mother and father show up since they were informed that their daughter had been returned, and Tesha runs into their arms because she's missed them a lot. If Tesha is a princess, then that must mean her parents are the king and queen of Elenoir, but they aren't as understanding as Virion was. As soon as Tesha's father spots Arthur, he demands to know what a filthy human is doing in his kingdom. He orders his soldiers to apprehend the human and execute him immediately, but none of them move. Tesha's father may be the current king, but Virion told them to leave Arthur alone, and they are all terrified of Virion. Virion tells the king that Arthur is the one who saved Tesha and helped her get back here, so they can't treat him like a criminal. Tesha also demands that Arthur be welcomed into their castle as a guest, but her father is hesitant to agree since it is usually forbidden for humans to set foot in the Elf Kingdom, let alone enter the castle. But he doesn't want to deal with a tantrum from Tesha, so he reluctantly agrees to welcome Arthur properly. Since the misunderstanding has been cleared up, everyone gets ready to head for the castle, but before they leave, Virion tells Arthur that he would like to have a word with him later. Arthur is a little wary of Virion, since he can tell that the man is extremely powerful, but he doesn't have much time to think about it because Tesha drags him off so she can show him around. This is the first time Arthur has ever seen the Elf Kingdom, so he is amazed by how different it is from the human kingdom. But the prejudice against humans is still strong, since all the elves apparently stopped what they were doing just to stare at Arthur while he walks to the castle with Tesha. However, no one says anything to offend him since he is officially a royal guest now. The only one who treats him kindly is Tesha, but Arthur is still trying to figure out why Tesha took so long to intervene when the guards were about to kill him. Just then, the pain in Arthur's chest comes back, and it's still getting worse by the day, but he still doesn't know what's causing it. After they arrive at the castle, Tesha is greeted by all her servants, and she instructs them to treat Arthur with care and respect, regardless of the fact that he's a human. And now that that's done, she asks Arthur if he wants to go play with her. But before that, Arthur says he needs to go talk to her parents because they probably want to hear the details of what happened to Tesha and how they got back. They all head into the meeting room, including Tesha because she doesn't want to be left out, and since they are going to be having a chat, Tesha suggests they should get some snacks. This has practically turned into a tea party, but they still have things to discuss, so Tesha's father decides to formally introduce himself. His name is Alduin, and as Arthur knows, he is the king of Elenoir. His wife's name is Muriel, and his father is Virion. Arthur introduces himself as a humble commoner from the kingdom hat of Sapin, and he is well aware that a human like him would normally never be allowed to set foot in Elenoir, let alone meet with the royal family, so he appreciates their accommodation. Alduin is surprised that Arthur behaves so maturely despite being a child, but more importantly, he wants to know exactly what happened with Tesha and how she went missing. Arthur explains everything that happened with him getting separated from his family during a bandit attack and ending up in the Elven Forest, although he left out the part about meeting Sylvia in the cave. Then he gets to the part where he meets Tesha and explains that he found her while she was being kidnapped by slave traders. Alduin is enraged that humans dared to try selling Tesha into slavery, but Arthur reminds him that elves have also committed the crime of slave trading, so it isn't exclusive to humans. That aside, Virion asks Arthur how he managed to rescue Tesha from the slave traders, so he explains that he killed them all. Upon hearing this, one of the guards starts yelling that there's no way a mere child could have killed slave traders on his own, but Virion tells him to shut his mouth unless he wants to lose his job. Arthur doesn't look like he's lying, so Alduin says he believes him. And now that everyone understands what happened, Arthur has a request he would like to make. As he already told them, he got stranded in this first after being attacked by bandits, so he would like them to help him get back home. Alduin is infuriated that a human would dare ask the Elven royal family for a favor, but Arthur did go out of his way to escort Tesha home, so it's only fair that they return the favor. Plus, if Alduin doesn't agree to help Arthur, he will have to deal with Tesha's tantrums, and he doesn't want that. He relents and agrees to help Arthur, but the teleportation gate that leads back to Sapin is sealed and can only be used once every 7 years during the meeting between the heads of the 3 tribes. And the last meeting was 2 years ago, so Arthur would have to wait another 5 years before the portal would open again. Arthur doesn't want to wait that long, and Alduin also doesn't like the idea of letting a human stay in Elenoir for 5 years, so he says he will arrange for a group of soldiers to escort Arthur back to Sapin. He wants Arthur to leave as soon as possible, but it's already very late, so he says Arthur can rest here for today and tomorrow morning he will leave. Arthur thanks Alduin for agreeing to send him home, but the pain in his chest is getting much worse and Virion seems to notice that something is wrong with him. A little while later, a room has been prepared for Arthur in the castle and he is currently taking a bath, but the pain just keeps getting worse and worse, so Arthur is getting worried that he might die. After his bath, he walks out onto the balcony to get some fresh air and hopes that it will help with the pain. He feels a little better now, but he needs to figure out the cause of his constant pain before something bad happens. Just then, Arthur looks up and notices Tesha and her parents on the balcony above him, and seeing them like that reminds him of his own parents. He still has no idea whether Reynold and Alice managed to survive the bandit attack, but he knows they are tough, so they must have made it out alive somehow. With that said, he still really wishes he could talk to them right now. Just then, Tesha notices Arthur and she can tell that he looks sad, so after she's done catching up with her parents, she goes to talk to him. Once she finally catches up to Arthur, she apologizes for how rudely her father treated him, but Arthur says he doesn't mind. He understands why Alduin would behave like that, since there have been decades of wars between the elves and the humans. So of course it would be hard for him to trust a human, especially when his daughter is involved. Bringing up the topic of parents reminds Arthur of the fact that he is far away from his parents and he is worried they might not be happy to see him. After all, the whole reason they went on a trip was for Arthur's sake, so they might blame him for the whole thing. He also blames himself for not being able to protect his family from the bandits and getting separated from them, but then Tesha grabs his face and starts shaking his head. She doesn't know much about Arthur's parents, but if they are anything like hers, then she is sure they will be happy to see Arthur once he finally returns. Just then, the corridor is filled with dozens of dazzling fireflies, and amidst the bright light, Arthur starts trying to recall his parents' smiling faces. He's been with them ever since he was reborn into this world, and not once have they ever given him the impression that they didn't love him, so why was he so worried that they might start hating him after what happened? He has been letting his trauma from his past life cloud his judgment with suspicion for a while now. He even suspected Tesha of backstabbing him earlier. But when he looks at her now, all he sees is an innocent girl who would never want her to friend. All of a sudden, Arthur senses a projectile flying straight at Tesha, so he catches it and immediately charges up his mana to attack the assailant. However, to his surprise, the one who attacked Tesha was Virion. Arthur can't believe Virion would attempt to do something as evil as kill his own granddaughter, but Virion tells him he never intended to hurt Tesha, and the projectiles he threw were just a couple of fireflies, so she wouldn't have felt a thing. However, he still finds it impressive that Arthur was able to react and counterattack so quickly. The reason Virion pulled this stunt was to verify whether Arthur was telling the truth about possessing the strength to kill those slave traders, and he was clearly telling the truth. Tesha runs over and tells Virion to stop messing with Arthur, but that's not why he came here. He noticed something interesting about Arthur earlier, so he wants to have a little sparring match with him to see how strong he really is. Virion uses his magic to create a sword for Arthur to fight with and lifts Tesha out of the way so she doesn't get hurt. Arthur agrees to the duel, so he charges forward and swings at Virion, but he is too fast. Even when Arthur uses mana to boost his movement speed, he still can't keep up with Virion, and just when he thinks he finally has an opening to attack, Virion smashes Arthur's sword with his palm. A piece of the shattered wood goes flying towards Tesha, so Arthur throws what's left of his sword at it to protect her. Arthur then attacks Virion with nothing but his mana, but Virion counters with his own mana. Virion's strength is completely overwhelming, so Arthur doesn't stand much of a chance at beating him, but he isn't one to give up. So after Virion blows him back, Arthur immediately charges back in and lands one clean hit on Virion's forehead. It didn't do much damage, but Virion is amazed that Arthur was able to slip past his defenses and actually land a hit. He wants to go for another round, but all of a sudden Tesha pinches his butt and tells him to stop causing trouble for Arthur. Arthur says it's fine, and he kind of feels honored that a man as powerful as Virion thinks he is worth dueling. While they're on the topic, Virion tells Arthur he wants to take him on as a disciple. Arthur is surprised and asks Virion if he's joking, but this isn't something Virion would joke about, so he asks Arthur if he will accept the offer. Arthur doesn't know what to say, especially since he still hasn't had a chance to inform his parents that he is still alive. If that's the only problem, Virion tells Arthur he knows of a way Arthur can talk to his parents right now. Arthur is intrigued, but before he can say anything, he is hit with yet another sharp chest pain, and Virion seems to know what's causing it. He tells Arthur that he has inherited a beast's will, and unless Arthur agrees to become his disciple, the beast's will is going to kill him. The story continues. We see after hearing such horrible news, Arthur goes to bed, but he's finding it hard to go to sleep. The anxiety of being away from his family, combined with the fact that he may die soon, gives him a terrible nightmare where he is haunted by a sleep paralysis demon. He suddenly hears someone calling out his name, so he opens his eyes and finds Tesha sitting on top of him. She's been trying to wake Arthur up for a while now, but he just keeps talking about some sort of monster, so she's starting to get upset. She tells him he needs to hurry up and get ready because Virion is already waiting for him outside, so Arthur gets out of bed and starts changing his clothes. While he is changing, Tesha asks him if he is really going to stay here and become her grandpa's disciple, but Arthur hasn't decided yet. It depends on whether or not Virion really get him in contact with his family, because as long as Arthur gets the chance to talk to his parents and let them know that he is alright, he will be satisfied. Once Arthur has gotten dressed, he and Tesha head downstairs together. But as soon as they open the doors, they hear Alduin arguing with Virion because he can't stand the thought of letting Arthur live in the Elf Kingdom. It would go against centuries of elf traditions if Virion were to take Arthur in as a disciple, but Virion doesn't care. He's fond of Arthur, so he's going to make him a disciple, and no one can stop him. Tesha tries to stand up for Arthur, but Alduin doesn't want to hear her opinion because she's clearly in favor of Arthur staying here. Coincidentally, Virion doesn't want to hear Alduin's opinion either, so he tells Arthur and Tesha to get in the carriage because they have places to be. As they are riding to go see Virion's mysterious friend, it takes so long that Tesha ends up falling asleep. Arthur asks Virion if it will take much longer for them to arrive, but he addresses Virion as Grandpa this time. Virion is amused by how quickly Arthur dropped the formalities, but if things work out and Arthur ends up living here under Virion's tutelage, then he would practically be a part of the family. Virion doesn't mind Arthur's casual tone, and if anything, he's glad that Tesha finally has a friend to play with. As an only child, she is the sole successor to the throne, and as such, most of the other kids avoid her. And the few who did approach her all ended up betraying her trust one way or another, so Tesha has a hard time opening up to new people now. However, when she's with Arthur, she always looks like she's having so much fun, so Virion is very thankful. Arthur also has severe trust issues, but when he looks at Virion, all he sees is a sincere, loving grandpa, so he feels like he can trust him. The carriage eventually arrives at their destination. Arthur wakes Tesha up and they all step out. Arthur is really curious to see who this mysterious person is, because they must be really important if a man as powerful as Virion is willing to come all the way out here to see them. Virion then angrily stomps on the door and yells for Renia to come out already, and when he puts his ear next to the door to hear if anyone is coming, he gets smacked in the face by the door. After regaining his composure, Virion introduces Renia as a special mage, and with her skill set, he is sure she can help Arthur get in contact with his family. She invites everyone in so they can get started, but once they are inside, All Arthur sees is a regular house with a bucket of water on the table, so he is starting to wonder how she's going to help him. Renia explains that she is a special type of mage called a seer, and as a seer, she is able to look into the past and future of people. She momentarily uses her powers on Arthur, and she can immediately tell that he is an interesting person because there are some parts of his past that she couldn't see. Although it's not like she would understand much anyway, since she only sees fragments of the past when she uses her power. With that said, Arthur didn't come here for her to look into his past or future. He came here because he wants to let his family know that he is alright. Renia pushes the bucket of water in front of Arthur and tells him to think of his parents in great detail to achieve the best result. She then begins using her powers, and in a matter of seconds, Arthur begins having visions of his parents. Alice has just finished preparing a pot of stew for dinner, which the two of them definitely can't finish, and Reynold loves this stew, but neither of them can really enjoy it without Arthur with them. For all they know, he could have died after falling off that cliff, and Reynold blamed himself so much that he nearly became an alcoholic. But he still needed to take care of his pregnant wife, so they were forced to head to the city instead of searching for Arthur. There Reynold got a job, and in a matter of weeks he somehow earned enough money to afford a house in the city. But no amount of success could ever make them feel better now that Arthur is gone. Just then, the two of them hear Arthur's voice, but they can't see him, so they are worried it's his ghost. Arthur explains that he is still alive, and he is currently living in the Elf Kingdom of Elenoir. He isn't exactly sure of how it works, but thanks to a friend, he is using a special kind of magic to talk to them. He wants to come home, but he can't do that right now because there's something wrong with his body and he won't be able to survive unless he fixes it. But he swears that he will return to them as soon as he has recovered, although he isn't sure how long that will take. He also doesn't want them to blame themselves for what happened because it was his choice to make, and if he had to do it again to ensure his family's safety, he wouldn't hesitate. Reynold and Alice are unbelievably happy to hear that Arthur is still alive, but having to say goodbye to them again brings tears to Arthur's eyes. Still, he is glad that he got to talk to them again, and he has decided that he will never make them worry like that ever again. But to do that, he will need to become stronger, so he asks Tvirion to make him his disciple. Now they just need to convince Alduin to agree to let Arthur live in the castle. Alduin is still against the idea because of his deep hatred for the humans, but Tesha reminds him that Arthur saved her, so if he kicks him out then he'd be seen as an ungrateful savage. Alduin still tries to argue that it would cause a huge incident if Arthur's presence were to cause any problems within the Elf Kingdom, but Virion already thought of that. He tells Alduin to announce that Arthur is his new disciple, and with Virion's power, no one would dare to complain or protest against Arthur being here. With that, Arthur has officially been given permission to live in the royal palace, and after the meeting is over, Alduin walks up to him to apologize for his rude behavior earlier. He may not like humans in general, but Arthur seems like a good kid. Plus, since Arthur saved Tesha as a father, it is his duty to repay him, so he tells Arthur he can think of himself as part of the family now. Arthur is surprised that Alduin and Miriel changed their stance so suddenly. But then again, Virion and Tesha were advocating on his behalf a lot, so it makes sense that Alduin changed his mind. Arthur thanks Alduin and says it's an honor to be welcomed into the royal castle, but Tesha interrupts and says this isn't good enough. If they are really going to welcome Arthur, then she wants Arthur to be allowed to play outside with her, and considering the fact that Alduin has already accepted Arthur, he has no objections to him and Tesha playing together. Now that they have permission, Tesha excitedly drags Arthur out into town to show him around, and he is once again amazed by the elven culture. Tesha knows this part of town well, so she tells Arthur that there's a shop that sells a lot of snacks down the road, but it's really popular, so if they aren't gonna hurry, then all the snacks will sell out. She pulls his arm to get him to go faster, and Arthur is happily following her, but then he accidentally bumps into a kid along the way. It was an honest mistake, but the kid starts insulting Arthur and yelling at him for getting his filthy human germs all over him. At this point, Arthur is wondering how this kid has the balls to be so rude when he is within punch range. But Tesha tells him to just ignore him, because it's not worth causing trouble over something as minor as this. Normally, Arthur would have taken the high road and walked away from Ferrith, but then Ferrith starts telling Tesha that she shouldn't hang out with trash like Arthur, and that she should be spending time with him instead. Ferrith is a member of the elf nobility, and he seems to think highly of himself, so Arthur decides to mess with him a little. He pretends that he's excited to meet Ferrith, but he intentionally mispronounces his name as Fee-Bitch. Ferrith gets mad that Arthur mispronounced his name, so Arthur apologizes and acts like it was a mistake. He says he will be sure to pay proper respect to Ferrith the next time they meet and turns around so he can leave with Tesha, but Ferrith stops him. He may be insufferable, but he's not stupid, so he figured out that Arthur was intentionally mocking him, and he refuses to let such disrespect go unpunished. He challenges Arthur to a duel with the honor of his family name on the line, and Arthur can't believe he was really dumb enough to request a duel. Tesha steps in and tells Ferrith that even if he is a noble, this is going too far. Ferrith says it is perfectly natural to challenge someone to a duel if they dishonor your name, but Tesha reminds Ferrith that Arthur is the disciple of Virion, and it would be incredibly stupid to challenge the disciple of the strongest man in the kingdom to a fight, but Ferrith is confident that he couldn't possibly lose to a human. He tells Arthur that if he doesn't accept this duel, then he would be bringing dishonor to Virion's name, but Arthur is still trying to wrap his head around this whole thing. In his old world, a duel was always a battle to the death, so it makes no sense for a kid to carelessly challenge him to a duel here. But judging by the mildly entertained looks on the adults nearby, it seems that duels are death battles here, so Arthur has no reason to refuse. Tesha asks Arthur if he's sure he wants to do this, and he says he is fine with it, so the duel becomes official and the two get ready to fight. As the duel begins, Ferrith confidently rushes towards Arthur with a stick in hand, but everyone thinks they have a plan until they get punched in the face, and Ferrith clearly wasn't ready for that. Ferrith is out cold, so if his friends rush over to check on him, but Tesha already knew things would end up like this. Anyway, since the duel is over, she grabs Arthur's hand and starts leading him away because she still has a lot of things she wants to do with him. The two spend the entire day together and visit all kinds of shops and stores, and after they've had their fun, they take a break on a balcony to talk. Tesha asks Arthur when his training with Virion is supposed to begin, and Arthur says he's going to start training first thing in the morning, but he clearly has something on his mind. Arthur thinks back to a conversation he had with Virion, and Virion clearly told him that his training is going to feel like hell. If he gotta describe it, it's going to feel like being submerged in boiling tar, and Arthur is going to have to go through that every day for several years without the support of his family, so Virion wanted to know if Arthur is truly ready for this, and Arthur responded yes. Even now, he is excited to begin training tomorrow, even though he knows it will be tough because he wants to gain enough strength to build his desired future. Tesha tells Arthur she will work hard too so she doesn't fall behind, but right now she still wants to enjoy their play date, so she suggests that they should go get some more food. That brings the episode to an end. Thanks for watching. Want next part? Subscribe the channel and turn on notification bell.